This is an interview with Catherine Roraback by Bruce M. Stave for the Women in the Connecticut Bar Oral History Project of the Connecticut Bar Foundation. The date is July 29th, 1999. Perhaps we can begin with your telling us a little bit about your early life, where and when you were born, and your early education and family.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My father was a minister there, congregational in those days, now known as the UCC. My mother was a native Brooklynite, came from one of the old Dutch families, and we lived in Flatbush. I went to a public school for grade school. And I was born in 1920, so that when I went to high school, it was sort of the depths of the Depression. And schools were very crowded, and my father decided that I ought to go to a private school. It's the one my mother had gone to. So it was a private girls' school that I went to for high school. I graduated in 1937, and then I went to Mount Holyoke College.
In growing up in Brooklyn, what was life like and for a minister's daughter?
Well, life for a minister's child is different than most other lives of children, I think. You tend to become a bit cynical about formal religion, or at least I did, because of the obvious contrast between what my father preached and what his parishioners did day by day. And one feels a little frustrated, at least for my father. I didn't feel frustrated for myself. But it was a very exciting place to live. I mean, New York is a great place to grow up. In those days, the subway was a nickel a ride, and you could go to any number of museums, or if the family had a bit of money, and there were always those odd moments. You may or may not know that the minister's wife gets the wedding fees when weddings are performed. That was the tradition in those days anyway. And my mother was a great one to use that money not for the necessities of life, but to take us to a concert or to take us to the theater or whatever she thought would be best to splurge it on. So I had great associations with weddings because I saw all these good things. And she would take us to all of the museums and so forth. So you get a very broad thing. And it was a very relaxed sort of life, as I remember it.
Okay.
I'm sure it wasn't for my father, but it was for me.
Now, first of all, you mentioned the discrepancy between what your father preached and what his parishioners may have done. Anything come to mind? Anything?
No, not particularly. But I just I can remember that impression of my childhood. I was being brought up in I suppose you'd now call it a highly ethical way. I don't know. Religion was an ethical thing in my home. I mean, it wasn't totally ethical, but it was certainly you were expected to do certain things and be a good person in your family and in your community.
Was this primarily from your father or your mother?
Both my father and mother.
Did your mother do anything aside from being the minister's wife?
Well, she was very active in the church affairs, but she didn't do anything outside. I mean, there was the women's society, and there was this and that, but she didn't work or anything.
Did one parent have a greater influence on you than the other? Or?
That's an interesting. In early days, I would have assumed it was my mother. And sort of in retrospect, in the last few years, as I've talked about this, I think it was both sides as a family. It just was well, of course, my mother died when I was about 25. And and my father lived until I was in my 50s. middle 50s, I guess. So that I had a lot more contact with him in that period than I, without the influence of Mother in it. So I'm not sure just where the strands occurred earlier on, but certainly during that period, and it was when I first began to practice law, actually. I can remember I got involved, this is in the 5 years after I'd been in practice, 7 years, 5 years, I don't know, whenever the Smith Act arrests occurred. And I should go back, because if you want influences,
Yeah.
there are other influences.
Please talk about them, and then we'll
Sure.
talk about the Smith Act.
Well, you're here in this office, which was opened by my grandfather in 1873. I have no memory of him, but he was a practiced law here for a number of years, and then he went on the bench. And about that time, his brother, who was a rather notorious member of the family, J. Henry Roraback,
Known as Boss Roraback?
the same. He had read law here, and he practiced here. And my uncle went to law school at Yale, and he became a lawyer here, and the two of them had a partnership for a time before Uncle Henry moved on to bigger and better things. And
Did you know that uncle at all?
Uncle Henry?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Did he influence you?
No. There are lots of very funny stories about that. If we do that, we'll be here all day.
Why don't you
Or maybe all week.
find you off of one or two?
No, Uncle Clint was a major influence in my life. He was a lawyer. He was the county public defender, and he had carried on this practice. I never saw Uncle Henry in the office as such. I mean, sometimes he'd be in town, but by the time I was growing up, he had already. I don't know whether he'd moved to Hartford then, but he certainly was in Hartford a good deal. And my grandfather and my grandmother lived in the house that's across the way here, which is now a law office, but that was the family home. And then my uncle took over this practice, and he was really sort of the mainstay of the family. He never married, and I had a maiden aunt also named Catherine who lived with him, and they took care of grandma and so forth. And they were sort of a second set of parents to me in many ways. Uncle Clint was, the epitome of a really good small-town general practice lawyer who also did a lot of criminal and trial work, which was quite common in those days.
When did you come up here to Canaan? Because if you were brought up in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
did you visit, or did you move
Oh,
here?
we spent all our not all, but Thanksgiving, Christmas were spent here. All summer we had this. My grandfather had bought this property at Twin Lakes, and my mother and father were given a house on the property for their wedding present, and we spent all our summers here. And the whole family was out at the lake. It was.
Do you have any siblings?
I have had a brother who's now died, and I have a sister. And
What about your relationship with them? How close were you and such?
oh, we were always a very close family. I was especially close, I think, to my brother.
What did he do?
He was in advertising, but that was sort of. We just had a lot of sort of having grown up in a very sort of insular family almost in many ways. We were all very close with each other. Not as much with my sister. she tended to move outside the frame, but I was always very close to all of the family.
What did your sister do?
My sister did many things. She got married and to an aeronautical engineer. They moved to California, and when she was there, she worked in a nursery school at length, and then They came back east for a time. She didn't. I don't think she was working. Well, she was working in sort of child care situations. When her husband died, she went back to college, and she got a degree at Sarah Lawrence, and then she went to social work school. She became a social worker.
Okay, going back to your own education, you said you went to the same private school that your mother went to in Brooklyn.
Yes.
What was that?
Berkeley Institute was known at the time. It's now the Berkeley Carroll School.
And what kinds of things did you like studying there?
I loved studying from the time I can remember. But I think I liked it all. I must say that I can remember that high school period. My father had been himself. He had graduated from Yale. I think one of the interesting things about our family was the emphasis that I see existed in the family for the education of women. Because when I went to school, everyone assumed, my father had put aside certain money for our college education, and it wasn't my brother's, but it was for my sister and me too. One of the big family fights that occurred was when my sister decided she didn't want to go to college, she wanted to go to art school, and my father was adamant. He was a very stubborn man sometimes, but he was adamant that she should go to college, and he was quite disappointed when she didn't, but it was a big division in the family. But in his own family, his three sisters, one of them went to Mount Holyoke in the 1890s. Another sister went to normal school, and a third one, Aunt Catherine, had gone away to LaSalle Academy, which is outside Boston somewhere. But she never went beyond that. She came back home and took care of Grandma. But it was sort of accepted that women went to advanced education.
Is there any reason for this?
Well, actually, my grandfather's two sisters, or two of his sisters I know, were school teachers. And it just seemed to be part of the family tradition. I don't know where it came from.
So then when you went off to college, you chose Mount Holyoke,
Yeah.
a women's school. There were less co-ed schools, I think, at the time. But why did you choose Mount Holyoke?
Well, there were several reasons. Number one, that's where my aunt had gone, so sort of in the family. But also, I think that I was very impressed by Mount Holyoke. My mother had originally been planning to go to Smith College when she graduated from Berkeley. And she went up there, but she didn't like what she felt was the snobbery of the place. And so I guess that sort of prejudice of hers probably spun off a bit. When I went to college, I could go anywhere I wanted to. Luckily, at the time, women couldn't go to Yale, or I probably would have been. My brother had to go to Yale because that was where the Rorabacks went. But I was free of that that bondage, I would say. So I went to I went to see various colleges around the Northeast, and I was even thinking about going out to California, which I didn't do. But I eventually, I had an interview at Holyoke, and I really liked it as a place. It's a very beautiful campus, as you may or may not know. So.
Now, this was the period 1937 to 41. was the end of the Depression, the beginning of World War II.
Yes.
What was happening on campus? What were you engaged in aside from your studies?
Well, I was, there was something called, and I'm trying to remember what the name of it was, but it was the sort of the interfaith group or something, who knows, some sort of religious bent to it. Although I don't think it was discriminatory, but who knows. I'm shocked at what I went through in some periods of my life. There was something called the Student Industrial Club, and I was active in that, which...
was that attached to the Student League for Industrial Democracy? Or was
no, it was just, this was a club on the Mount Holyoke campus. There was a woman in the economics, I majored in economics. There's a woman in the economics department named Amy Hughes, Hewes. She taught labor economics and plus a number of other economics courses, but her real specialty was labor economics. And she would work with this club. We would meet with women workers in industry. So, you know, there were textile workers in Holyoke. I can remember going to a textile mill somewhere east of Holyoke. I'm not sure. I would recognize the name if I heard it, but anyway, it's not relevant. But you could see what it was like to work in a textile factory and what conditions were like and that sort of thing. And that was sort of her way of introducing you to things. She was also active in something at that point known as the Hudson Shore Labor School.
The
Hudson Shore Labor School. And that was it's the successor to what was the Bryn Mawr Summer School of the earlier 30s. A group of women professors on the faculties of the seven sister colleges had organized it. At least they were certainly the active ones, and they would teach these courses. But the idea of it was that they would have women workers in industry come to the school, learn how to do things like write a pamphlet, you know, organize a co-op. They'd have them speaking and so forth to try to train women to be union leaders. And I think it had a close alliance probably with the ILG, but I'm not sure of that. There were certainly a number of textile and garment worker people in it. And each summer, one student from each of the seven sister colleges would be designated as a student assistant or something like that, and we would be there to do all the pleasant and grunt work, both of them. I mean, one of my jobs was to drive this old station wagon of theirs and sort of handle the co-op itself, and other people did other jobs, you know. But it was a really wonderful experience. And this is in the context of something else that I think is important in terms of my history, and that is that most modern feminists don't understand what a group of very strong women were around in the 20s and 30s. I mean, you may see an Esther Peterson on television sometimes, but there were this whole group of really tremendous, dynamic women who had gone through the feminist struggles of starting at the turn of the century. Amy Hughes was one of them. And when I went to Holyoke, it was the fall when Roswell Ham became the first male president of Mount Holyoke. And the women on the faculty were were violently, I'm not all the women, but most of the women on the faculty were violently opposed to him, so that, you know, to have a man in charge of their college seemed to them a shock. Something they didn't accept. But in any event,
Did you have any feelings about that? Was this...
no, you don't really meet the president very often when you're a student. But I certainly was conscious of the way these women felt. I mean, they were very, very overt about their antagonism and stuff.
Now, your major was economics.
Yes.
Probably not unusual in the 1930s for college students, but why did you choose it?
Well, I was interested in, I'm not sure why I chose it. Now that I think back, I assume that it was because of my interest in the labor movement, which seemed like one of the ways that the world might be changed for the better. I'm not sure whether that was it. I know that I was considered brilliant in chemistry, and I had a job in the chemistry lab, for which I made all of 30 cents an hour, which is my spending money. But I just didn't want to spend all my time in a laboratory. I think I can remember very vividly that my idea of it was nice to go out and enjoy the spring afternoons on the campus, or even winter afternoons.
Did you have any special friends in college? Any close friends?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Anyone come to mind particularly?
Well, I had some. I actually not a close friend, but one of my more notorious acquaintances, as you may or may not have read. I don't know whether you've read anything about me or not. Ella Grasso was in the class ahead of me.
Uh-huh.
Ella Grasso was Amy Hughes' favorite in that class, and I was Amy Hughes' favorite in my class. So, you know, Ella was head of the Student Industrial Club one year. I was head of it the next year. She went to Hudson Shore one summer. I went to it the next summer, and so forth. The funny story about Ella, which I think she never forgave me for, was that she also ran the, she stayed on to do graduate work, got an MA at Mount Holyoke, and in that year, one of the jobs she had as the graduate student in the economics department was to run the statistics lab. So we had this statistics lab, but Ella taught us all of the labor songs in that statistics lab. You know, we used to be there doing our statistics and learning very radical songs. And one of the songs that Ella Grasso taught me was the International, which I always thought was very funny. This friend of mine in New Haven had known about this, and all my friends knew about it. I mean, I used to laugh about it, but I never said anything publicly. But Connecticut magazine at some point had an article in which they said that I had learned the words "the International" from Ella Grasso. You know. I have no idea who told them. I never wanted to know, frankly, but Ella was absolutely livid at this point. It was when she was governor.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you keep contact with her when she was governor? Did you have...
Well, we were never, I was very critical of Ella, actually, but I felt that she used to make speeches praising Amy Hughes, you know, this wonderful inspiration. Of course, Amy Hughes would have probably did if she turned over in her grave, at some of the things Ella did. I mean, the compromises she made and so forth. Amy Hughes never would have accepted it. And at some point or other, I was talking to a woman who was writing Ella Grasso's speeches, and she was about to write a speech that Ella was going to be giving at Mount Holyoke. We were talking about it. And I said, I just wanted, I wish she would give Ella a message that if she once more mentioned Amy Hughes in any of her speeches, I was going to personally call her to task for it, and that it was a promise. And then just to let her know. And Ella never mentioned Amy Hughes again. So.
Made your point.
Yes.
Let's go back to college.
I was also, yeah, go ahead.
You knew Ella there, and you were studying economics, and you were in the Student Industrial Club. Amy Hughes was an influence. Anything else that you remember particularly?
Yeah, there are lots of things. Number one, I can remember the winter of 39 and 40. The summer of 1939, I went out on what was known as a peace caravan that the Friends Service Committee used to run. I don't know whether they do them any now or not, but a group of college students would go to a town and just run peace activities, speak and pass out literature and so forth. And this is an interesting association too. I was on this peace caravan that summer in western Pennsylvania with Pat Sleazer, who eventually became George Ritter's wife.
Oh,
I mean, this is small world division.
okay.
Yeah. And when at the end of that summer, we drove back from it was in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. We drove back through the Finger Lakes region to Connecticut. And when we were driving, it was when the invasion of the lowlands began. Or maybe it was when it was Poland, but I don't know. It was the beginning of the really active war.
September of 39 with
Yeah.
Poland.
Yeah. So so we went to, and I went back to college, and that year I was studying political science. And I was doing pretty well in college, but obviously I almost flunked out in that year as my junior year, because we spent all our time in very intense philosophic discussions. I mean, part of it was, I'd been on this peace caravan, and I, when the lowlands were invaded, I remember the impact it had of just, this is what, you can't really sit back and let this happen. So I think it was as though you'd lived a very protected, isolated life, and suddenly you had to face certain issues.
Did you change?
I did brilliantly in political science. Political science philosophy. It was a philosophy course. That was my best course. The other things practically went by the wayside. I guess I did all right with Amy Hughes too, but I just, things like psychology seemed pretty irrelevant to me at that point.
Did you become an internationalist at that point?
I certainly eventually, it took some period of time, but I eventually became in favor of our intervening.
Before 41?
Before 41, yeah.
Okay. All right, you graduated in that year, and...
There's one other thing in that
please.
period. I was also the head of, and this is where it leaves me. If you know the history of student movements, you may know which was which. Ella was the head of SDS, I know that. Or
No, it couldn't have been SDS isn't...
was the next subsequent one, okay.
Yeah, SLID, Student League for Industrial Democracy. No?
No, it was the radical one. Or the one that became there was a big split.
Okay. I'm not sure because SDS doesn't start till later.
Yeah, there was a big split in the student organization at the time of the Nazi-Soviet Pact.
Right.
And I was head of it. I became head of it.
You were head of which?
Whatever this organization was. I can't remember their names. And I can remember I was part of a group that we were meeting. My memory is it was at Harvard, but I may be wrong. And the split occurred, and this group that I was part of seceded from the organization. Included Bob Morgenthau and I can't remember any of the other names. I just remember Bob's because it's been, I've seen him since. Actually, I knew him in law school too. And we formed the intervention, whatever you want to call us. You know,
well, there was American First, and then there was the.
But this is the student group.
Oh, student group. Okay, so I'm not.
So, you know, it was sort of Joe Lash was involved. He may have been over the. There were a bunch of people involved who certainly weren't students anymore. It was one of the things that was always very funny. I can remember visually, and I cannot remember the name of the person who I assume was the CP person who was sort of trying to hold things together, but we split.
Well, the Popular Front went by the wayside as a consequence of the pact.
Yeah.
So.
And this split the student organization too.
Mm-hmm. So you were active and the head of that, you say?
Yeah.
Okay. What kinds of activities did you engage in?
Well, it was, I can't, oh, this really was not part of that. It was just something else I did. But a good friend of mine who was head of student government at the time and I organized a torchlight parade for Roosevelt in 1940, which there was a picture in the Hartford Courant on the front page. My uncle got a little upset. It's not like having a Smith on the front page of the Courant.
You were identified then?
Well, the name was there, Catherine Roraback. And there aren't many Rorabacks in the world, so
Were there other Democrats in your family?
No. Although my father was always considered not a black sheep, but slightly independent. He read the New York Times instead of the Herald Tribune all his life, which was considered pretty radical. And he also supported Debs at some point. And I couldn't tell you who he voted for in 33 or 36, but I mean 32 or 36. But I wouldn't have been surprised if he voted for Roosevelt. I just don't know. It wasn't the sort of thing he talked about.
Okay. But you were supporting Roosevelt in 40, and did you get much comment from other members of your family aside from your uncle, who was the Republican boss?
No, I didn't get the comment from Uncle Henry because I didn't see him that much. I'd see him at family occasions or something. My Uncle Clint was the one who was really pretty upset with me. We used to tease him a lot. I can remember we were going back to the city. Must have been the summer of 1940, and he always had this man who drove for him would take us to the trains, and he would go to the train with us in great departure. So we'd take the train over in Millerton, and he came, picked us all up, and at that point he and the family were all living at the lake. So I can remember we're pulling out of the driveway by the house, the old family house there, and he had sunflowers growing on the porch. And I can remember teasing him that the sunflowers always faded come September. And he didn't enjoy that joke at all. Although he was used to being teased by us.
Was your support of Roosevelt as a consequence of the domestic policy or the foreign?
Domestic, yeah.
The domestic.
Yeah.
Okay.
My brother was very much for him. And by 1940, however, I think the entire family were for Wilkie, other than me. You know. I wasn't ready to vote. I wasn't able to vote yet, but I remember that vividly that summer.
Okay. Now,
so the sunflower would have been 36, I guess.
Well, the sunflower was Alf Landon.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so
Oh, I should tell you another story. Do you want an Uncle Henry story?
Please, yes.
It's my favorite one about him, although it's one my brother told me. My brother was the only male Roraback coming down on that generation, you see. Really, Uncle Henry had a son who had an unfortunate accident when he was young, and he was never going to amount to very much. So Uncle Henry took a very close interest in my brother, you know. So
your brother's name was
Albert.
Albert.
Yeah. So Al would go to all sorts of occasions that the rest of us didn't get invited to. He was down at Uncle Henry's place in Harlington when Landon was there, you know, and Hamilton, who was the Republican chairman. So anyway, on one of these occasions, my brother got into a big argument with Uncle Henry about the some New Deal program. And Uncle Henry got very upset, and he said, "Albert, you have to understand, it's not that I'm against it, it's just they thought of it first."
That's a good Uncle Henry.
It was sort of a great one, but
to go back to your career and stuff.
Yeah.
See, you graduated in 1941, and I gather at that time you go on to Washington.
Yes.
Can you talk about that for a moment? What led you there, and what did you do?
Sure.
And was this something you anticipated doing?
No, my last year in college, I was trying to decide. I was thinking of either going to law school. I was thinking of going to law school. I was thinking of going maybe to social work school. And I think I even had the catalog for NYU Law School. I know that I was seriously thinking about it. But then I had just had enough of being in school and decided I would like to work. Well, by the spring of 41, there weren't many jobs around. I mean, we weren't over the Depression, and it was very hard to find a job. I went around in New York. I did volunteer work for an organization known as the Women's Trade Union League in New York City. And then I got a job, finally, civil service job, working for the unemployment insurance office, a local office in Brooklyn, just doing work, receiving claims and things like that. And I was making, I think, $20 a week or $16 a week or something, living at home. And I had taken a civil service exam, and I got offered a job in Washington. And this was in the beginning of 42. And I went to Washington, I guess it was March of 42, I don't remember exactly, I know it's...
Originally, was it difficult to get those earlier jobs, the unemployment job and such?
It wasn't easy, no. I felt lucky to get a job. I was registered with employment agencies and stuff. I didn't have any, I didn't have typing skills, for which I was thankful later on, because I know a lot of women whom I knew, especially in Washington. Washington was filled with people who had done everything for their doctorates except write the thesis. They all went to work at Washington during World War II, but the ones who were female, of course, didn't get drafted, and they came to Washington, and they were doing secretarial work, and although they were far more qualified than I was on an economic level or something, they couldn't get out of the trap of being a secretary because I lived with a woman who was about to get a PhD from Chicago in economics, and I made more money than she did all the time we lived together. She had far more education than I did, but that was just the fluke. She was being a secretary, and when you got on that track, you didn't get out of it.
Okay, well, so...
interrupt here?
Yeah.
This one, I don't know what's going on with this thing.
Okay. So as we were saying, in Washington, if you had typing skill and you were a woman during World War II, you were sort of stereotyped and pigeonholed
Yeah.
as a secretary.
Yeah.
Now,
There were two tracks for government employees. One was general administrator. I think it was GIF or something, or I may be thinking of the UN now. But the other one was professional. And if you got a professional, you went up the professional scale. You were going up there, and the GAF crowd just sort of moved off to administration. So I was always glad I didn't officially know how to type. I actually did, but I never told them.
pardon me. So
It's
what
okay.
did you do in Washington?
The first job I got was in the Department of Agriculture, the Division of Program Surveys, it was called, and we did public opinion surveys. There was a man named Rensis Lickert who was head of it, Likert, as I remember it. It was a very famous. It was one of the original broad typed polling, very interesting stuff. And I was an analyst for them. Eventually, I went out and did some interviewing because they felt everybody should do everything, but I was primarily in analysis. And we did survey work for all sorts of government agencies. Although it was officially in the Department of Agriculture, we were doing things for the Treasury Department and for other agencies. We did a fascinating study of Detroit I don't know exactly when it was, probably the fall of '42, may have been later, but we predicted in that study that because of the various social factors, and a really fascinating city actually, that there would be a riot in Detroit, which occurred unfortunately about 6 months later.
In 1943, the famous, Belle Island?
Yeah.
I see. And you, on what basis did you predict this?
It was on the basis of the tensions in the town and what were the foreseeable things. It was all based on a survey of 300 interviews. Very, very fancy sampling and stuff.
What was life like in Washington at the time?
It was fascinating. You know, that it was, for one thing, the sort of thing I was doing was relatively new, so there were very young people involved in it, and sort of borderline work, and at some point I wanted to go to work for the War Labor Board, and I got a job in Detroit, so I moved to Detroit. But it was after the riots, and I worked in Detroit for about a year and a half, and on that job I worked for the Regional War Labor Board in Detroit. and found Detroit one of the more fascinating places to live. I never wanted to go back because it was such a tense city, but when you were a government employee out there, since you were, and especially for the War Labor Board, you were neither management nor labor, and nobody talked to you. I mean, the city was totally split, and you know, the government employees all sort of lived in their own little island, but it's a very fascinating place. Anyway, I had a very interesting job there. I worked there doing presenting disputes to the regional board, you know, for their determinations, and I had to write the memos and present them to the board. And then but I didn't get along well with the chairman of the board. I didn't get along well with the chairman of the board, so he was a man who always arrived at the office at 8:30 in the morning and usually left by 3, if not earlier. But he expected everyone else to keep the same hours. Since I was working till 11 or 12 at night, I frequently didn't come in till 10 in the morning, which didn't sit well with him. So he was on my case, as they say. And I went on a vacation that summer. Oh, I took a vacation. He said we could have overtime, you know, compensatory time off. So I took a week's or 2-week vacation on my compensatory time off, which really made him angry, at which point while I was gone, he eliminated my job.
What was in Washington, Detroit social life and such? You're a young woman. It's wartime.
Yeah. There's
anything special happening, activities or anything of that sort?
Well, it was in some ways. I mean, there was a plethora of women and not many men. So, unless you happen to know the Army personnel, but generally speaking, it was just it was an unbalanced society. Let's put it that way. All your friends were off fighting in the war. It was some very fascinating things happened, but I think that really gets off the...
Well, give an example.
Well, I lived with this woman in Washington who was working for the Board of Economic Warfare. She was the one who was secretary at the Board of Economic Warfare and practically ran her division, I think, but she was nevertheless always clocked as a secretary. We had a good friend who was in the Office of War Information, and he and his brother used to spend a lot of time in our apartment. And Mike had brought over someone one day. Well, he came to the apartment once, and I just was terribly antagonized by the people who were with him. I couldn't imagine why he had them as friends, and I made cracks about it and stuff afterwards. And then, subsequent to that time, he brought in a fellow who worked at the Office of War Information, who was from Colombia. And his name was Bobby, and he was really a South American gigolo almost. But he took a great liking to the friend I lived with, Jerry, and began to go around with her. And I got into huge arguments with him just about every time he'd be at the place. I can remember once saying to him that I suppose he was going to tell me that Mussolini had the trains running on time. I remember this explosion. And so I have no idea what triggered that remark. But anyway, one Sunday morning, we always had this big brunch because we were the only people who had an apartment. Everybody gave us their ration stamps, and we would have coffee and everything else that no one else had around the house. And so we were having one of these brunches. And just before it was going to start, Jerry said, "Why don't you get the paper?" So it was delivered outside the door of the Washington Post. And in those days, the Washington Post, top half of the right-hand side were always big headlines, you know, about whatever battle was going on at that time, and reports. And I started to look at it as I carried it in. Something kept catching my eye on the left, but I just kept looking at this paper. And finally, I looked over to see what it was, and there's a picture of Bobby on the front page of the Washington Post. So I looked and I said, my God, Bobby's been arrested as a spy.
Oh, is that so?
and, you know, needless to say, very few of our guests showed up for breakfast that day because they'd all met Bobby at our house. It was very funny.
Your microphone popped off again.
Anyway, it was a big spy ring. He was one of the major part that was primarily in Detroit, and there were sort of simultaneous arrests all over the country. But that's part of living in Washington. I don't think anybody else had that experience other than us. It turned out later on that these two persons that Mike had brought over earlier had been FBI agents trying to decide whether this would be an appropriate locale for Mike to bring Bobby to. He was their contact. None of this did I know. And apparently everybody would get horrified every time I'd blow up at Bobby.
Well, you stayed in Washington and Detroit, and the war ended.
Yes.
And what did you do at that time?
I remember that on VJ Day, I called up my uncle and told him I was going to go to law school.
Which uncle? Clint?
Clint, yeah. And so and I said, do you think I could get into Yale? Because this is the end of August, and you know, I assumed it started in September. I found out that it was on 3 semesters, so that it didn't start till October. And I asked him to call up Yale. I mean, he was a graduate of Yale. I thought he could. So he calls up, and they arranged for me to come up for an interview at Yale. And I went, and I can remember and I took this aptitude test, which they gave in those days. And he and my aunt picked me up, drove me up here for the weekend. I hadn't seen them for a while. And I said I really didn't think I was going to make it. And he said, nonsense, I'll call up Charlie Seymour. And I said, if you do, I'll kill you.
Who was the president?
Yes. I said, if I can't get into Yale on my own, I don't want influence. And we had a big argument, but I got accepted. And apparently it was on the basis of the jobs I'd had and the work I'd done. You know, had nothing to do with having almost flunked out of Holyoke in 1 year.
Why did you make the decision to go to law school at that time?
Well, I had pretty much decided that when the war was over, I was going to go to law school. I mean, I just, you couldn't leave a job during wartime. It seemed like the thing to do.
Okay, now, when you went up to Yale,
I didn't want to stay one of the real horrors is if you live in Washington and you see the government employees who've stayed there forever because security is there. When you're young, it seems like a pretty frightening thing to do to yourself. I didn't want to be one of them.
So, who interviewed you at the time? Do you remember? Were there any women who interviewed you?
No, I have no memory of the process. I know there were no women on the faculty. There was a woman who practically ran the place named Arlene Hadley, who was a daughter of a past president of Yale, and she was the secretary to the dean or something. But I mean, she was a major domo in the whole operation.
But no women faculty members?
No women, no.
Okay. Now, how many women in your class?
Well, this is what's interesting. When I went there were 3 terms a year. And I don't know what they call them. I mean, it's a 30, They were going for
Trimester.
trimester. Yeah, there'd be 3 a year, and there were people were coming and going, so that I was part of the class of February of 1948 officially when I entered there. I was up here at the lake my last summer. I was supposed to go back and finish law school, and it was much too beautiful to leave and too hot to go to New Haven, and so I just stayed at the lake for the summer. Since I had a house to myself that summer, it was really lovely. But anyway, I was one of 30 women when I was in law school. I mean, the number was roughly 30 out of 450 students.
Okay, 30 in your class.
No, 30 in the law school, and there were
law school.
450 students in the whole law school. So it was about 1 in 15.
Okay. And were you friendly with the other women in the class? Or?
Oh, with all the women at the law school. We formed a group. There was a women's lounge, so that, and since there were just the 30 of us, we all became very close friends. We lived in the same dormitory, pretty much. Ellen Bree was a student there when I first entered. I think she graduated that first year, I'm not sure, but she was a student. There was a woman named Mary Fitzgerald from Hartford, Mary Aspel, her name became. She's now dead. And I got to know them. Ellen never really practiced. She was legislative commissioner's office before she went on the bench. Mary worked in a firm, and it was known as Gordon Fitzgerald and something or other in Hartford, Bill Gordon.
How were the women in the class treated, or in the school treated?
Well, there was a professor, Fred Rodell, who was supposedly a great liberal, and he taught tax law, which was sort of one of the necessary courses, but he had what he referred to as Ladies' Day. It was the only day of the year in which he would call on a woman, and it was only women were called on that day. And it was really, I didn't stay to find out what it was like when he started, the year I took it, when he started questioning, asking questions of women. I knew what was coming, and I just left. I thought all the women should, but they didn't do it. I wasn't about to sit there and take that sort of stuff from him, so I walked out of the
Did anyone else leave, or nobody?
Not that I know of. So I never found out exactly how he did it. Other things happened. I mean, the students, for the most part, it was the students were worse than the professors. I mean, there were some students who were very welcoming to women, but mostly it was the more liberal men. You didn't find the more conservative ones. They would sort of grump off to themselves.
The liberal men did what?
We were all friends. I mean, it was just a normal, friendly relationship. But the more conservative ones, I don't remember them being terribly friendly to us. Now that may be unfair, because when I think back, I certainly had some good friends who weren't very liberal. But so maybe but generally speaking, I think that was true. There was a crowd of us that sort of hung out together, and I can remember once there was one black woman. In those days, we probably even said colored. I'm not sure. It's long before the days of the fine determinations. But anyway, right. I always do that. We were all going to go to a dance, and she had a friend of hers was coming down from Harvard to go with her, and he didn't get there for reasons I can't remember, and so we were upset because we didn't know who Barbara could go with, and we asked one of the fellows in the crowd who wasn't going to the dance because he was probably too broke or something, if he would take her. And he said, sure, he'd love to. So he took her to the dance. Now, she was black, and person after person out of this Yale Law School crowd came up to us. I mean, the people outside our crowd came up to us to ask who brought Barbara. Because the question was, which white person had brought this black woman to the dance?
Was there any other African Americans in the class, male?
The only other person was a fellow named Earl Carl, who was blind, and I think he was, and he didn't live at the law school. I think he lived in, my memory, I may be wrong about this, my memory is he lived out in the Dixville area. And Earl didn't go to dances and things. I mean, he had his obvious problems as a blind person, but
Did the Barbara that you're mentioning, remember her last name? Or
yeah,
what is it?
Barbara Scott.
Did she live in the dorms with you?
Yeah.
And
everybody knew that she was a close friend of all of ours. So they, anyway, they finally ended up asking Bob her date. Did he know who brought her to the dance? And he's a wonderful guy. They eventually got married, I may say. But anyway, he drew himself up very proudly, and he said, I did. Isn't it a great democracy when an upper-class Negro will go out with a middle-class Jew?
That's a wonderful...
Yes. So, anyway.
Okay, when you had chosen to go to law school, you mentioned your uncle who took you, and he was obviously supported. What about, were your parents, they were alive at the
My
time?
father was. My mother had died that year before.
What was his attitude towards
Oh, he was, everybody was very supportive. I mean, nobody thought of, at the time, I didn't think it was a funny decision. I mean, I certainly didn't think it was unique to think of myself being a lawyer. And to this day, I don't, when I got to law school, I realized there were a bunch of prejudices around, and I'd certainly run into them in other aspects of living, but I just had never thought of it as being not an option. And I don't, I don't know whether I was naive, whether this is true of other women. I mean, it was something that now, of course, in my family, it was, the one thing that didn't happen in my family, I know when my brother was graduated from Yale, my uncle wanted him to go to law school, and he offered to pay his way all the way through.
Clint or Henry?
Clint.
Yeah.
And Al didn't want to do it. He had no desire to be a lawyer. By the time I decided to do this, my uncle didn't make the offer to pay for it. And I suspect that somehow, I'm not sure he would have. It's a strange sort of thing, but whether he might have if he'd been in the same financial position at that point that he had been before.
How did you pay your way through? Was it your...
I had saved money working in Washington, and I paid, until the last year, I'd paid everything for myself. And then my mother having died, and the house in Brooklyn had been hers, and she didn't have a will, so that I had some sort of an interest in the house. I my father paid my last year, and I signed my interest in the house over to him.
Okay, now, aside from Fred Rodell at the law school, who treated women in his way, were there anyone else like that? I mean, that you came into contact with?
No, nothing that extreme. There were things. I mean, I remember that it was known that Harvard at the time did not admit women, and the dean at Harvard said that it would be very inhibiting for him to have women in the law school because he couldn't tell the same jokes in class that he was used to telling, you know. I mean, that's what he was quoted as saying. Yale had always had, not always, but it had women for a number of years. I know women who graduated from Yale in the 20s, so it was not an unusual thing there. But in some ways, I didn't really have the feeling of real bias on the faculty, but then, you know, later on you realize all these subtle things, and we weren't conscious of them at the time. I didn't really think of it as a problem, and I have no idea why it, you know, it was an option of something I could do in this world.
Did you have any mentors in law school? Anyone special who you liked working with?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I did a paper with Fred Rodell. He wasn't such a... I mean, aside from this bias of his, he was a rather nice guy to know. Fowler Harper was there. Tom Emerson were my really close friends at the law school. Wes Sturgis, who was the dean, was a magnificent teacher and a wonderful person. Fleming James. I mean, they were all great. I could probably keep on going and hit the whole faculty.
Okay. Any courses you particularly liked in law school in terms of the subject matter?
Subject matter. Interestingly, I loved procedure. You'll find a lot of lawyers who feel this way. It's one of the nice courses. I also torts was fun. Partly. There was a great professor at the time, well known, named Underhill Moore, and he taught bills and notes. One of the most amazing professors, because he took, you know, I don't even know the casebook method of teaching. So, Underhill took, I think, the first 3/4 or more of that course until the last week. We'd only covered 8 to 10 pages of or maybe we had 8 cases that we covered in the whole book that we had for the course. We had to go racing through the rest of it. But what he did was to take one case and just teach the whole thing out of this one case with variations and stuff. He was a genius of a teacher. Fun to take that course.
Were you involved in any activities outside of the classroom in law school?
Well, I was. I can remember I went to. There was nothing much. Oh, I went to. We always did work with the Legal Aid Society, and I worked down there a lot. I also, at some point along in there, got involved in the Progressive Party, which is formed.
Progressive Party of 48.
Progressive Party of 48. Yeah.
Henry Wallace's party.
Yeah. And I, before that, there was some committee, I can't remember what it was called, something committee of the arts, sciences, and professions or something. And I had gone to meetings of that, and Tom Emerson was very active, as you may know, in the Progressive Party in Connecticut, and ran for governor on their ticket. But I didn't. I guess I didn't get officially involved. In those days, you had to go through the character committees, and they were being. I mean, this. People think McCarthyism started with McCarthy, but as you know, it started a lot earlier, a lot earlier, and people were having trouble getting through the character committee of the bar in every state. In Connecticut, it was a county thing. I was going to be taking the bar officially out of Litchfield County, so I didn't have to face the New Haven County character committee, but that character committee was especially vicious. Vicious in terms of
Politics.
Yeah. But I never had an interview with the character committee up here. At some point I called up my uncle. I had said to him that I had to have 2 lawyers sponsor me, so I had sent him the forms so he could have 2 lawyers sign for me, and then he sent one of them back to me and said, we've got cousins in Torrington, had them, they're both dead now, Charlie and Jim Roraback. And I think Charlie was either on the character committee itself or else on the examining committee, and he didn't think it was appropriate for him to sign the form. Probably didn't approve of me either, I know Charlie, but anyway, so I had one of my professors, I think Fleming James, filled it out for me, and we filed it. But at some point I called up my uncle, I said, I haven't been asked to come up for a meeting of the character committee. He says, oh, Catherine, they don't need to see you, they all know you. That's the end of it. I just was passed on through as a Roraback.
I passed on through as a Roraback. So you were admitted to the bar in 48?
Yeah.
And what happened at that point? Did you work for someone else?
Yeah, I worked for a lawyer in New Haven. And before that, I went looking for a job. My uncle said at the time that he would love to have me come up here, but he just thought it was not the place for a small town was not a place for a single woman starting out, that I would have a much better life if I stayed in a bigger city. And in many ways, I'm very glad he did that, because if I had come up here, I never would have had this sense that I created my own practice, and it would have been something handed to me generation after generation, which is okay, but I had a sense of real accomplishment about my life because I stayed in New Haven. I went looking for a job, and that involved a series of interesting experiences. I went to see Tom Robinson, who was the public defender in New Haven, great criminal lawyer. And he was a good friend of my uncle's. And so I went to talk to him, and Tom said to me that he was, that he had just taken on 2 young people, one of whom is Arnold Markle and another Jim Greenfield. And that he just didn't have enough work to take anyone else into the office with him. So but we talked, and he talked to me about things, and the one thing he told me was that he asked me who I was going to see, and I said, well, I thought I'd go to some of the firms. I was going to go to Wigan and Dana, and I'm not sure I should be saying this officially to a bar association, but I remember Tom saying to me that Catherine Tilson worked there. John Tilson's wife, I don't know if you ever knew them. Anyway, Catherine Tilson worked there, and he said, you don't want to go there because you don't want to be Fritz Wiggins' bag carrier, do you? and he indicated that that's all a woman would get in that firm. It's interesting too that one of the other big firms in town at the time was Tyler Cooper
that
No,
out.
it wasn't. Yeah, it was Tyler. It was something Gumbart, Corbin, Tyler, and Cooper. That was the name of the firm at the time. It eventually is now Tyler and Alcorn or whatever they call it. But in those days, it was Gumbart, Corbin. And one of the persons in that firm was Mary Manchester. She was the authority on probate law in Connecticut. She was their probate person. She had written, there was a treatise in those days on Connecticut probate law, and I think it was called Cleveland Hewitt and something, but I'm not sure. I have it around here somewhere. And she had written, the edition that everybody used. She never became a name partner of Gumbart, Corbin, Tyler, and Cooper in all of the changes that occurred later on. They'd add names, they would change it around. Mary Manchester's name never appeared as a partner, which is just fascinating to me because, I mean, she was the person who did their probate work, and she was a partner at some point, finally. But I don't think she was a partner for a long time.
Did you ever talk to her about this, or did she
No.
ever say anything?
No, it was not the sort of thing you talked about, but I was certainly conscious of it. Most firms were smaller firms. I went and talked to Bill Gordon in Hartford, and he said that he had Mary in the firm, and he didn't think he could take another woman in. And he's very honest about it. And he was a very lovely person. I went down to, oh gosh, what's the name of that firm? I can think it was my father's, one of his roommates at college was the head of the firm. It was in Bridgeport. And when I stopped by there when I was in Bridgeport one day, and this woman who ran the office was a secretary. It was a big firm for New Haven, for Connecticut. Sat and talked to me, said she was sorry Mr. So-and-so, whatever his name was off in Europe on a vacation. But she knew he would like to see me because, he'd been such a good friend of my father's and stuff. She said, but don't ask him for a job. This is the person who ran it. I said, well, she said, they'll never put you out. You'll always be just sitting in an office. You'll never be given anything to do. And the office work. What I wanted to do was go to court. I had this picture of myself being a trial lawyer. That's what the family was. And that was just totally foreign to most people. Bill Gordon could understand it, maybe.
Were there any women litigators at the time?
My impression, and I'm not sure just when Margaret Driscoll passed the bar, but Margaret Driscoll was there. She did all labor work. She worked with this Arthur Weiss was the man she worked with, but he'd been partners with her father, as I remembered. I'm not sure. I know she's one of the people you're supposed to be interviewing, and she was certainly. I think she was already a member of the bar, but she was, at least. I was very conscious of her being there. And she's the only person I knew who did any court work aside from a couple of women who did collection work in New Haven.
Did you share your desire to be a courtroom lawyer with other people, and did you get
yeah.
reaction? What?
Well, the lawyer I went to work for was a man named Harry Lander. And I must say that in retrospect, I realize all the things that he did for me in a way that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. But he was just very supportive. What he wanted was somebody to be in his office. He did primarily commercial work. But he had a lot of general stuff in his office. You know, his clients would get into car accidents and other things. And he wanted to have somebody in the office who would do all that general stuff. And he was quite willing to have me do it and be there and encouraged me. And I had the advantage, which I think younger people now, when they go out and they figure they have to go work for a law firm, they get targeted with a division of the law firm or a specialty and stuff. And I didn't have that experience. I had this wonderful experience of just broad range things, which most lawyers did in those days, I think, younger lawyers. But you know, Harry just assumed that I would do this sort of thing and pushed me out to do it. I remember my first short calendar. He wanted me to go through all the files that were down on the short calendar and, you know, be so that I would as he's explaining it to me, I'll understand what's going on and be able to follow things better. So I'm dutifully was really well prepared on them all. I get to court. We sit there. He introduces me to a few people, and it's, you know, there's always a few minutes before court. And then he said, "Well, I'm going to go back to the office." And I said, "You're what?" And he said, "Well, you can take care of it. You know all about it." He said, "If you have any problems, ask Charlie." This is Charlie Album, who was a good friend, who was the clerk of the court. So I lived through it, but that's the way he dropped me, you know.
Well, how large a firm was this? Was it only
Just
him?
him.
So, I see.
Yeah. And but the first time I went to county court, that was the city court. Then I went to county court short calendar, and that was another experience. I mean, the city court was a sort of a rollicking place, but I walked into short calendar. Have you ever been to court?
Not too often.
Yeah. Well, short calendar is a day when, in those days, I guess in New Haven you didn't have divorces, but all the motions are heard and all, you know, procedural things. And there are a few temporary hearings that go on. But just about every member of the bar would be present at the county court. I mean, this was common pleas court. I remember this happening here. And Harry sent me over to take care of short calendar, and what you have to do is to stand up and say ready, or, you know, they would call the list of trial cases for the week, so somebody had to be there just to say, you know, you'd be ready on Tuesday or whatever. Really routine things. I walk into court, and here is this room full of lawyers, just, I suppose, several hundred, and the sheriff, and et cetera, et cetera. And before court begins, everybody's talking. They're, you know, finding out whether somebody's son has gotten over his broken leg or whatever, you know, telling jokes and everything else. I walked in, this real hubbub, and it stopped totally. It's cold. And not a sound occurred in that courtroom until the judge took the bench. And they all were just sitting there looking at me. It was one of the more traumatic moments of my life, I
What
think.
did you do? You remember?
I just stayed there. I didn't know what to do. And, you know, when the judge came on the bench, the sheriff says, "Oy, oy," and we got going. But it really stopped cold.
Now, how long did you work with Lander?
Until it was about 6 years.
From 48 to
Let's see.
54?
Just about 54. It may have been 53. It was, at some point I was getting, you know, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to be junior to someone. He was not about to start a big law firm or anything, and I was thinking of moving to, you know, I can remember not being exactly sure where I'd go and stuff. And Harry was one of the people who encouraged me to try it on my own.
What were you getting paid when you worked with him? You remember?
I can't remember my memory, and it may be, my memory is it was $40 a week.
Now, how did that relate to lawyers generally? Is that
One of the things when you were a young practitioner was that you never knew how anybody else was doing because we all played our own games, you know. I would get the family to give me a dress for Christmas so I'd have something to wear to court. It was, we were all scraping, I suspect, but I have no idea what other people were getting.
And so in '54, he encouraged you to go off on your own. And did
Just
you
to
do
try
that?
it. Yeah, I got a room in the same building as he was in, 185 Church, and he gave me a typewriter, or one of the ones in the office, and a desk that had a thing for the typewriter to be in it. I got an answering service.
That's what it said. Okay,
Okay,
yeah.
I got, and he gave me a couple of chairs. A friend of mine came over and helped me refinish this furniture. I had a table, and I bought a set of the statutes right across the street from the county bar library, so I didn't really have to build up a big library. And
Where was this? The office?
185 Church.
185 Church Street.
Yeah. And I would sit there looking at my name in reverse on the door. You know? And it was for about 3 days. I thought I wasn't sure what would happen.
This one, you want to turn that off for me?
Sure.
It's about that office. You're setting up your first office on your
Sure.
own. At 185 Church Street.
185 Church Street. A single room. I remember there was as in those old buildings, there was a basin in the corner. I had a little screen around it. Harry gave me a table, a desk that could take the typewriter, which he gave me, and a couple of chairs. And I bought a file cabinet. And I got an answering service. I had a woman who picked up stuff to type. No, that was later, I think. I think I started out typing for myself, actually, which was hard work in those days. As you may or may not remember, it's quite a different world with computers now. When you typed, even without an electric typewriter, you had to, if you made a mistake, you had to redo the whole thing. And I sat in that office I remember it was 3 days. Harry had given me some things to, or I had some clients too, just a couple. But all of a sudden I got busy and I never stopped afterwards.
What kinds of early cases did you first have?
Well, actually, by this time it was 54, and if I'm correct in my dates. And I had already done several cases that were sort of notorious, but I'd done a lot of very general stuff for Harry. I used to always do all the petty stuff in criminal court, like motor vehicle cases and breach of peace, you name it. I also knew people in town. I began to represent some people, and Harry was very, he never objected to the things I did, which was, he would sort of encourage me, actually. I had done a denaturalization case when I was still working in Harry's office. and that was in federal court. I had one disadvantage. Every time I went to federal court, there was a judge named Hinks who had been a great friend of my uncle. And Judge Hinks, every time he saw me, would think to appoint me as an attorney for someone in federal court for which you didn't get paid a cent. So whenever I showed up in federal court, I knew I had one free case I was going to have to perform. But I got all this great experience of just dealing with case after case, so that when I got into some really important ones later on, it was I had a backlog of comfort.
Who came to you in the early cases? What kinds of people? I mean, and did they, was there any, did more women come to you than men, or?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think, but I really haven't got that in my memory totally. I do remember one of the first notorious case I did. Let's put it that way. It was a year after I'd been in practice. There was a May Day riot. Not a riot, but a May Day demonstration going on over in the Grand Avenue area, and a local gang broke it up. And that was, so here were the 4 people who got arrested were communists, needless to say. And that's a great learning story I had, but not necessarily feminist.
When was that? That was...
I would guess it was 1950, either 50 or 51. And I had been called by someone who had known me in the Progressive Party and said these people had been arrested, would I represent them? This is on a Saturday afternoon in New Haven, beautiful spring day. I mean, it was a gorgeous day. And I didn't have the foggiest notion what to do. So I called up, I guess I called Harry first probably. And Harry said, well, you should get the bonds reduced. I mean, they were being held on something like $5,000 bonds, which were high in those days. And so he said, why don't you call it? You have to get Charlie Album to handle it, because he was the clerk of the court. So I called up Charlie and had this magnificent conversation. Charlie said, no, you have to get the bonds reduced, you have to call a judge. Now, he said there are 3 judges. I can't remember who the third one was, but one of them was Salato, who would be scraping his boat out in East Haven. One of them was Al Provis, who would be playing golf at the Woodbridge Country Club. And I can't remember who the third judge was. And he said, Salato's not going to reduce the bond for you. Al Provis might, so you better try him. And and then he said, after you get him and get hold of it, the judge, and get, if he agrees to reduce the bond, have him call me. And he said, and then you have to produce, you're supposed to bring in a certificate of title, but if you bring in someone who owns a piece of property in town, a house or something, and he has his deed, I'll take your word for it that the title's good. I mean, this is very informal practice, may I say. You'd never get away with it now. So and he tells me exactly how to do it. So I'm just about to thank him profusely, be in touch with him. And he said, one other thing, Catherine, he said, don't try any of the silly law school stuff like habeas corpus. It takes too long. That was my instruction in criminal law. But anyway, I did get them out on bond later that afternoon. And then that evening, I had gone off to the theater. Unbeknownst to me, they were having a big party at somebody's house. I mean, these are the people who'd been the communists and their friends. And the police busted the party at about 11 o'clock in the evening and charged them with lascivious carriage. I don't even know this great statute we used to have.
Yeah.
Yes, so, and other things, and who knows what else they got charged with, but I remember the lascivious carriage, which I think the young man next to you, Bruce, should know that the definition of lascivious carriage was any act which arouses lewd or lustful emotions. I used to tell one lawyer in New Haven that it was an unfair sort of charge because every time I walked into the courtroom and he looked at me, I was the one who had caused him to have lewd or lustful emotions, and I was the criminal. Anyway.
Now, this, by the way, was while you were still working with
Harry.
Lehman.
Yeah.
So was the case sent to you, or was it sent to...
No, it was me.
It was you.
It was me.
Were you taking your own cases at
Yeah.
the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Now, as time goes on in say, 54 or after 54...
Well, I should say, when we got to this in 54 was when the Smith Act defendants were arrested in Connecticut.
Right, and this were
And that was...
the Little Dennis cases?
Yeah.
Sort of? Yeah, I have actually interviewed some former communists, one of whom was the treasurer of the state party. At the time.
Jake Goldring?
Jack Goldring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so your name had come. Maybe you can talk a little about
Sure.
about
Yeah.
this. Actually, before we do that, Goldring.
Yeah.
And what happened in those cases, the Smith Act cases in Connecticut?
There was only one Smith Act case in Connecticut, but they were all over the country at the time. There had been two major cases first, or I guess the first major one was the Dennis case, which was the National Party leaders. They were tried in New York City. After that, and I'm not sure what order things happened, and that trial, I think, began in 49, if I'm not mistaken. After that, there were arrests of Communist Party leaders in California, Colorado, all over the country, and the so-called second string case in New York, which was the Flynn case. So in Connecticut, they arrested leaders of the Communist Party in Connecticut, plus one National Party leader. And they did this in all these cases, always had a National Party person. The one in Connecticut was named Martha Stone. She came from New Jersey. And not the Martha Stone who was a friend of mine who's a lawyer.
Right.
We should keep this clear. No relation as far as I know. As a matter of fact, I'm sure because the Martha Stone in New Jersey was married to Bill Asher. Anyway, they were arrested on charges of conspiracy to overthrow the government. No, conspiracy to advocate the overthrow of the government of the United States by force and violence. And it's a very complicated sort of case to even try to describe. I used to say to people when it was going on that I had a feeling that I was in the middle of a bunch of that cotton candy, that every time you'd sort of try to touch it, it would disappear in your fingers and you never knew what was going on, because the case consisted a good deal of the introduction of readings. It was readings by the U.S. attorney works, various Communist Party works. I mean, communist works of mostly Lenin and Marx. But it was always very funny. The only thing you could do, you'd sit in court day by day, and the Justice Department had these cases all prepared. The U.S. attorney would be standing there with a notebook, large, big notebook, turning page after page, and when it came time to introduce something from whatever book it was, he would then make an offer, ask to introduce this. And it was always being introduced in evidence subject to connection. So, I mean, this is a euphemism of the law that if you don't have enough of a foundation in its subject connection. And so you go on for days listening to these various things. The only fun you could have in court, really, we used to try to jazz it up a little, was to say, I used to get up periodically, and Cy Cohen who's now a judge, I think, Simon Cohen. He was the U.S. attorney in those days. And he loved to read this with, as he began to read, I would get up and ask, if I could have the year of publication of the book. He'd be saying 1872 or 18, there was never anything very modern in there. And I don't think they ever got beyond 1920. But it went on, and finally the judge said, well, he was going to admit all this stuff. I never did, at that moment, figure out what there was sufficient in that record to admit it. But it was the world in which you lived in those cases. Because the conspiracy is just an agreement, and a conspiracy to advocate, you have to, it may be an oral agreement, but then if you're going to advocate, is reading the book advocating, or, and so forth. They had a little red schoolhouse out in Brantford, as I remembered. It was somebody's barn, and it was painted red, so they always referred to it as the little red schoolhouse. And this went on for, the trial lasted about 6 months. The defendants were, see if I can remember them now, it's hard to remember. Sid Taylor, it turned out when the case was begun, it was known as the Silverman case. Sid had not realized that his name wasn't Taylor. He'd actually been born Silverman. Sid Taylor was the chairman of the Communist Party of Connecticut. Joe Demo, and I don't think he had an official title, I'm not sure. Sid Resnick, Jake Goldring. We knew him as Jake, not Jack. Either way. A fellow named Tate. Somebody from, was Tate from Hart? I think Tate. There was somebody from else, I think. And this Martha Stone. I think there were 8 defendants altogether. I can't remember all the names now. Anyway, I was retained officially by the Communist Party, or by the families of these people, but the problem was we couldn't get lawyers who were willing to represent them. I can remember in my youthful exuberance thinking, there's a fellow named Dan Morgan who was a great trial lawyer in New Haven, and we approached him to see if he would participate, and he said that he just was too old. He didn't have the energy to take a case like that on, and I couldn't imagine a trial lawyer not being able to take a case on. I now know. I would say the same thing myself nowadays. But anyway, at some point, the State Bar Association, I think that by this time we had asked Judge Anderson to appoint lawyers. I mean, the lawyers who were there. I was there. There was a fellow from Bridgeport named Sam Gruber, and when the case was pending, Sam's wife, she developed cancer. I'm not sure just when it happened, but she was in terminal stage of cancer, and so Sam had to withdraw from the case. And I believe, and that was in the summer, but I'm not sure whether it was the summer of 54 or 55. These cases go on so long, how do you know? In any event, Sam withdrew. Frank Donner, who was a lawyer from New York, had been working on the pretrial motions with us. And there was a lawyer from New Britain, Marvin. Gosh, how terrible. He moved to Arizona afterwards. Anyway, it'll probably come to me. Anyway, Marvin and Sam and I were the three lawyers, and then Sam had to withdraw. And Marvin and I were both relatively new in the practice, and Frank was only there to do motions and official. I think he'd only come in for that. Anyway, actually he stayed on and through the whole case. But we'd asked Judge Anderson to appoint lawyers, and Anderson, rather than subject lawyers to what was a really horrendous sort of appointment, although there were times when lawyers that judges didn't like got appointed to cases like this, but Anderson was not that kind of judge. In any event, he approached the state bar, and my memory is that the state bar raised money, whether by an assessment or whether by or how they did it. But I have this memory that these lawyers who were appointed by the court were not appointed until the state bar provided the money to pay them.
Well, this is such a horrendous assignment that there'd be a reluctance to assign a lawyer to it. Why would Catherine Roraback take the case?
Well, actually, I took it without assignment.
I know that.
I found, actually, I'll tell you what I said to my uncle, because the day that these people were arrested, and Marvin, whatever his name was, had gone into court with them when they were being arraigned, and said that I would also be an attorney. So once again, the name Roraback came bouncing out over the radio, etc., etc. And my uncle was livid. He was livid for an interesting reason. I mean, he wasn't livid about representing a communist as such, but he called and said, why did you take it so far? He didn't say it to me. He called up and he said, I want to talk to you. And I said, sure. And he said, well, can you come up? So I that was on a weekend. I came up. I spent Sunday with them, and we had this long talk. And his first question to me was, why did you take the case? And I said, well, if a woman walks in your office and says, my husband has been arrested, what do you do? And that was the end of our conversation. I mean, he understood that, now I was not at the stage where I said, well, I'm not going to take it because it's, it's a jazzy case or something. I must say that I was also extremely tempted to take it, and I didn't say that to my uncle, but I think he probably knew it. But in point of fact, when you do a case of that sort, you have the luxury of having to read constitutional law for the length of the case and think in those terms, and it's a big challenge to be raising issues that I think of as vital issues, and to get paid, not much money, but to get paid to do it is not. Now, I didn't realize, I must say that I guess I've been rather naive in my lifetime. I took the case. After that, my uncle had conversations with my father, which my father told me about later, saying, he thought that I had ruined my career, that I would never be able to recover from this, that he was worried that I just would not be able to practice law, and things of that sort. And that he urged my father to intervene. And my father said, I said to him, if she's doing what she believes in, then I will not intervene. And that was his criterion. If it was something I thought should be done and I was doing it, then he supported me fully, which he always did.
But it was very dangerous at the time, particularly at that McCarthy period.
It was. Well, I have told the tale, and it's not. I can tell you, I used to be able to tell you, but I can't now, that there were only about 6 lawyers in the city of New Haven who spoke to me, other than the ones who were assigned on the case itself, who spoke to me on the street. I was totally ostracized for a while.
And would this be men and women?
Well, there were only men in those days in the law. Yeah, I had good friends, and I had a good friends with whom I spent a lot of time, but the lawyers who spoke to me were few and far between.
Now, was this out of fear, or did they just disagree with you?
I have no idea. My guess is it was fear, but being tainted. There were clients who didn't come to me because they knew that I was tainted. Even some of the so-called left-wingers of New Haven didn't, at times. Now, most of them treated me as though I was a goddess. I mean, I remember I got the flu at one point when I was, during that trial was going on. I went to the doctor, and I was feeling miserable, but I walked in this room, and here is this is a doctor whose name we don't have to use, but anyway, he apparently took care of all of the left wing of New Haven. I walked in that room, and here are these women sitting around. There were about 6 of them. And I sat down, and, the nurse comes out, or the doctor may have come out, I can't remember, who said, "Who's next?" And they all turned to me and said, "You are." And I said, "Don't be silly, I was the last one in here." And they said, "No, I was too important. All the rest of them could die of whatever they had, but they were going to make sure that I got cured."
Who was the doctor? I mean, is it just...
No, I don't. He's dead long since.
Okay. Well, what the case itself? How did it ultimately end up?
Well, Al Marder. I didn't mention him. He was one of them. Yeah.
Right.
Because he was found not guilty. What a name to forget. There was a hung jury on another one, I think. I can't remember, but I remember Al was found not guilty, which I always thought was funny. For this, I for the life of me, I've never been able to figure out why the jury picked him. he was certainly not the least culpable of the crowd. He was one of my clients. We had spread around. I represented 3 of them, and then, but we did it in such a way that there was always one. If for instance, I got sick, there'd be another lawyer in that courtroom to represent the others. So that we all had multiple clients. But I think I was the only one to represent Martha Stone. I'm not sure. I represented Martha Stone, Joe Demo, and Al Martyr. The case went on appeal after the sentencing to the Second Circuit, and by that time there had been a decision in the so-called Yates case, which, and on the basis of the Yates case, in the Second Circuit, they reversed the convictions.
Okay. Now, another